Good morning, church. Hope everybody's doing well this morning and ready to go into the Bible study that we have for today. We're going to be looking at the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, as some of us are familiar with calling this book today. It's a relational foundations, how God built us. God built us for relationships. First of all, a relationship with Him, and then a relationship with other people. Remember, we talked about earlier last week about how God, when He made Adam, Adam wanted someone who related to him completely. And He made Eve from Adam's rib. And so this couple became one. God told them to become one. And that really is what we're talking about here in the book of the Song of Songs. Solomon is engaged to be married to a lovely young woman. He's fallen in love with her. He wrote this book. It's a song that Solomon wrote when he was engaged to this young woman, and then later as they marry, because it wasn't an arranged marriage like many of Solomon's were later in his life. It was a time when Solomon was probably relatively young, and he had fallen in love with this woman. She was not royal like he was. She was a common farmer's daughter, because she tells us in the first chapter that she had tended the vineyards. Her skin was dark from being out in the sun. She didn't feel worthy to be the king's wife, and yet she knew that he loved her, and she trusted that love. And this is a song that Solomon is writing, probably a song that later was sung at weddings. It's a song about a young couple who falls in love, and it is about love. It is about that couple becoming one flesh, that sexual intimacy, that gift of God that He's given us to have relationship with one another, and to have an intimacy with one partner in a marriage relationship, and to share common interest, and to have someone in your life that is always there for you. And so it's much more than one act. It's something that God gave us as a gift to consummate a relationship between one man and one woman in the marriage relationship. Of course, God knew that Satan most likely would turn this into something ugly, because we know that sex in our world has been turned into something ugly. It's a plaything. It's an entertainment, a source of entertainment. There's no commitment, no strings attached. Friends with benefits, all those things that we hear because people take it so casually. That was never how God intended for it to be. It's a sacred gift that He gave to man and woman, so that they could show their love for one another and procreate, to have children. And God told them to be fruitful and multiply, and this was the way that He gave them to do it. But you ask yourself, why would God put this book in the Bible? His name is never mentioned in the whole book of Song of Songs. But I think God knew that we would need it, because He knew what Satan would tempt the world to do with this beautiful gift that He had given to the man and woman. Satan would turn it into something ugly. God gave us this book, I think, so that we would know what His real intention was, for us to have intimacy with one person throughout our life. And I know that there are different interpretations. Some people think it's a relationship of God to Israel. It could very well be, because you could see very many comparisons there. Some think it's a relationship of Jesus Christ to His church. Could very well be, because we can see many comparisons there as well. You could compare it, I think, to all three of those things. A man and a woman in love, planning to be married. God, and how He sought after Israel and loved her throughout the years, and unconditionally, no matter what happened, He always loved Israel. And then, of course, Jesus Christ, and that great love that He has for us, that He went all the way to the cross and died for us, so that we could have a relationship with Him. So it could be all of those things, and probably should be all of them, but I think the simplest, most straightforward way that we can look at it is that it's simply a love song. It's a love letter that was written from a man to a woman he loved. And he's concerned. They're courting right now. In the first chapter, we're not going to look at the first chapter this morning, but they're courting, they're talking, they're conversing one with another, they're complimenting each other, and they're flirting, and it's just that courtship. You know, if we were, any of us that have ever been married, we know that we had a courtship before we got married. We got to know that other person. That's kind of what that first chapter is them talking and some of their friends talking with them. And then in the second chapter, we get a little bit deeper into the thing. They're planning their life together, and they're planning a marriage. And they realize that, and you know, this was not like I said, not a arranged marriage for Solomon. He had fallen in love with this young lady. This was probably never someone that he would have had an arranged marriage with, because she would have never been chosen for that. But he loved this woman, and they were planning their life together, and they knew that because there were differences in their families, that they would have to be careful how they planned their life together. There would probably be problems. There's always problems in marriage relationships. You're not going to have a perfect marriage. You're not going to have a perfect anything in this life. And so in the 15th verse of the second chapter, that's the first verse we're going to look at this morning, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in bloom. The woman had already said that she had worked in the vineyards. That's why her skin was so dark. She had a deep, dark suntan, not like the women around the palace who never hardly saw daylight at all. So she was very different in that way. But Solomon liked that. He loved her dark complexion. He said, you know, she had called herself a lily of the valley. That was a common flower in Israel. It was nothing special. But he said that she was a lily among thorns. She was the most beautiful lily that he'd ever seen. He liked the way she looked. But when they say that, you know, so once again, we see the word vineyards here. The little foxes, fox was a common animal in ancient Israel, small animal, probably about 16 inches tall, no more than 20 pounds. They burrowed down into the ground and made little holes and lived in them. But they could get to a really small space. And people who had vineyards in biblical times had to keep the animals out of them, because they would eat all the fruit. And here they would eat all the blooms before the fruit came on. So they usually would build a wall around their vineyards. And that would keep out the big animals like the bears and the larger animals that would get in there to eat their vineyards, the fruit of their vineyards. But the foxes could get through the little holes in the stone walls. And so that's what Solomon is talking about here. Catch the foxes for us. Stop those little destructive things that are coming to our relationship for us, our relationship. Stop those little problems that will sneak in through those tiny little holes that you never thought they could get in to a loving relationship. And once they get in there, they can ruin the vineyard. If those foxes ever did get through those walls, they could eat all the blooms off of those grapevines, and then there wouldn't be any grapes. Or if there were grapes, they could eat all the grapes too. But here they're eating the blooms because the fruit was not yet on the vine in this relationship. They weren't married yet. It had not been consummated. They were still courting. And so they knew that there were, especially since there were differences in their families, they knew they had to be careful not to let the little problems come into their relationship. If the little problems came in, they could turn into big problems. It's the same way today in any relationship. If there's a problem, it needs to be talked about. It needs to be gotten out in the open. Communication is key in every relationship. And it's our key with God too, in our relationship with Him. We need to talk to God if we've got problems. And He'll talk to us through His Word and through other people and through ways that He gives us. But we need to talk to Him, and we need to make sure that those little problems in our lives don't turn into big problems, whether it's in the marriage relationship or a relationship with Christ. Because little things, even the smallest little tiniest thing that you wouldn't really think that much about, if it's not addressed and taken care of, then it can really grow into a big problem. And so they're planning, they're making sure that that doesn't happen to the relationship. Catch those little foxes for us. Friends, make sure you tell us if something's there that we need to address. Catch them and let's get rid of them before they turn into major things that would ruin the whole vineyard. The woman talks in the 16th verse here, and she says, "My love is mine and I am his. He feeds among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, turn around, my love, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the divided mountains." My love is mine and I am his. He feeds among the lilies. She knew without a doubt that her husband was her, hers and hers alone. This was a mutual love between two people. And she trusted him completely. She said he feeds among the lilies. The word feeds there means browses. This was the king. He could have any woman he wanted. She knew that. She knew very well that he could have other women if he wanted them. He was the king. But she trusted him completely. She had earlier said she was a lily of the valley, and now she says he feeds among the lilies. There's a whole bunch of other lilies in the valley too. And he browses around and he looks at those young ladies. He looks at those lilies. But she herself did not feel worthy of the king's love, but she trusted the king's love. And she didn't worry about him choosing someone else because she totally knew that his love was real. The love that he felt for her was real. And I think in that way, we could really relate that to our love for Christ. How many times have I said, or you said, I don't know why in the world Jesus would die for me. I have no idea. I'm not worthy. I'm not worth that. I'm nothing. Why would he go to the cross and die for me? He had that kind of love for us. He has that kind of love for us. And you know what? The best part of that is we may not ever understand how he could have loved us that much. But one thing we can do is trust that love. We can trust it. We can trust his love. And that's essential in our relationship with our marriage partner. Trust is essential to any kind of a committed relationship. It's also essential in our relationship with God. We can trust him completely. He is the most trustworthy being that we will ever have in our lives. God is totally and completely faithful and trustworthy. But even in the marriage relationship, that's very important. And she did trust her fiancé, even if he looked at other women and he browsed around among them. She knew that he would come back to her until the day breaks. He could be out all night looking and doing the things he did as the king. But she knew that he would turn around and be like a gazelle or a young stag on divided mountains. He would always come back to her. Because she was the one that he loved, and she trusted that love that he had for her. And that's a wonderful gift when you have that kind of a love that you can trust. You never have any doubts about the other person. That's the best thing about a good, godly relationship, a marriage relationship. That you can trust that other person completely. Remember we said last week when we talked about the Proverbs 31 woman that her husband trusted her. When he went away to work, when he came, he knew that she was going to be doing things that were beneficial to him and the family. He didn't have any doubts about that. He trusted her. And this young woman, even though she is not married yet, she already completely has this kind of trust for her fiance, who is Solomon. And God's love for us is very, very much like that. He loves us unconditionally. You know, sometimes in marriage, we love our partner, our marriage partner, even on those days when they're not very lovable. And that goes both ways. But that doesn't mean we're going to quit loving them because they do something wrong or something we don't like. God's the same way with us. He's never going to cast us aside because we do something that he doesn't approve of. He loves us through it. And that's what we do in marriage. We love each other through those rough times when, those days when we're not very lovable. Those are the times when we need to love that partner just a little bit more. But trust is a very essential part of any kind of a committed relationship. The lady has a dream in the 3rd chapter. She starts out here in the 1st verse. This almost has to be a dream. She doesn't tell us it's a dream, but because some of the things she does here, most likely a young woman in Israel would never have done. So let's just read and see what she dreams about. In my bed at night, I sought the one I love. I sought him but did not find him. She's dreaming about her fiance, and she's dreaming about after the marriage, obviously, because they're not married yet and he would not have been in her bed. But she's dreaming in that dream sequence. She reaches out for him, and she did not find him. I think she's thinking about what the marriage relationship will be after they're married, when he is there in the bed with her. Naturally, being a virgin and a bride-to-be, she might have had some, certainly anticipation for that night, but also some anxiety too. But this dream, in her dream, when she reaches out, he's not there, and it alarms her. And she says in the 2nd verse, I will arise now and go about the city. Through the streets and plazas, I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. This woman she's seeking him because she loves him, and she wants to bring him back to her bed. That's clear. So she's dreaming about after the marriage relationship and how they will consummate the marriage through the sexual intimacy that they will have. And she's alarmed by the fact that he's not there. So she goes out into the city. Now, like I said, a young woman would most likely not do this in real life, so this most likely is a dream. The city would be a scary place to go out in the middle of the night. And certainly down the streets and the plazas, that would have been a dangerous place for a young woman to be. It probably still would in cities today. But she's doing it because she's seeking the one she loves. He's worth the search. He's worth her going out there and into dangerous territory. He's worth anything that she would do to bring him back to her, because she's alarmed that he's not there, but she can't find him, it says. She's alarmed, but she can't find the man that she loves, no matter how hard she looks. And it alarms her. But notice, in the 3rd verse here, the guards who go about the city found me. The guards who go about the city, every city in Israel, especially the large cities, had guards who watched for outside forces coming into the city that would harm them, and watched for things going on inside the city that would harm the people. It's kind of like the police do today, But these guards found the woman. But she didn't have to find them. They found her. I think that the guards here to us would be godly principles that stop this woman in her tracks and make her, in this dream, realize that she has to follow godly principles in her life. She can't go and search for this man before they're married. She has to wait until after the marriage to have him with her in her bed at night. So the guards go about the city, found me, her godly principles, guarding her desires, and then they ask her, or she asks them, have you seen the one I love? She has a desire for this young man, a desire for Solomon. He's handsome. He's good looking. She loves him. And she says, have you seen him? I mean, I don't want to do the wrong thing, but have you seen him? She's very anxious about finding this man that she loves. And she says, I had just passed them when I found the one I love, and I held on to him and would not let him go until I brought him to my mother's house, to the chamber of the one who conceived me. She had just passed the guards, the godly principles that had been brought up in her mind, and then she found the one she loved. She was so relieved to find him, and he was safe, and she felt such relief. It said that she held on to him and would not let him go until she brought him back to her mother's house. She had been alarmed about where this young man was, and when she found him, she wanted him to be safe, so she's bringing him back to her mother's house. That was her place of security. She wasn't raised in a castle, in a palace like Solomon was. but wherever her mother was, that was her security. That's pretty much the way most of us feel that had a good mother. And so in her dream, she found him, and she secured him in her arms, and she wanted to bring him back to her place of security, which was her mother's house. Obviously, she probably would not have done that in real life because it was the middle of the night. She wouldn't bring him to her mother's house, certainly not into the chamber of the one who conceived me in the middle of the night. So she's dreaming here, and she's dreaming about this young man, and she's in this dream, her desires have gotten her to thinking about him to the point where she wishes maybe that he was there with her in her bedchamber. But she knows her godly guards, the godly principles that she's been taught, have taught her that there's a time and a place for that, and that cannot happen until after the marriage. So she talks to the young women of Jerusalem in the 5th verse. She says, I charge you by the gazelles and the wild does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. You see, she realizes that she's had the desire. It was something that was ungodly until the godly desires, the godly principles, the guards put her on the right track again in her thought sequence. And even though she had dreamed of having this young man with her in the bedchamber, her godly principles had stopped her from that. So she's sharing this information with the young women of Jerusalem. The gazelles would have been the young men. The wild does would have been the young women. Do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. That was a warning to the young people of Israel that the gift of sexual intimacy within marriage exclusively is a reminder that these two become one flesh together by covenant and commitment. Now, those are the things that are, when we hear those words over and over in marriage ceremonies, covenant and commitment. You take this other person and you commit to them. So she's giving the young women advice. You do the same thing. You let God be your guide in your relationships with the young men. Because if we allow the sexual relationship to come before the marriage, there's always a certain amount of guilt that goes along with that. It's not the way God intended for it to be. Many times that happens. It can be rectified. Yes, God forgives sin. It can be forgiven, but it's not the ideal, the way God intended for it to be. And He intended for this to be inside the context of one man and one woman married for life. That's the ideal that God had. There's no doubt about that. And, when you stop and think about it, all created life procreates basically in the same way. But human beings are the only people that God has given the ability to keep that under control in our lives. He has given us the ability, and certainly as Christian people, He has given us His Holy Spirit to stop those godly principles, those city guards that stopped her in her dream. Those things can stop us from doing the things that are not pleasing to God or that are outside of His ideal. And if we choose to honor that, then we'll always be glad we did later. And so this is the warning that she gives to the young women of the city. Do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. This is the second time she said that. Now she's going to say that one more time. So this is something she's going to have to keep reminding herself of as she thinks about her marriage relationship. As with any of God's commandments and desires for us, He only wants what's best for us in life. God always wants what's best for His people. And He doesn't do anything outside of that in our lives. And He wants us to always, He wants us to strive for the ideal. And so sexual intimacy after marriage is His design for us as male and female. One man, one woman for life. That's the ideal, and that's the perfect model that God has set for us. And that will bring us more joy and completion than any other thing in our lives. So we need to remember that is the way that God, he talks, he has given us the guidelines in his word. And sometimes we're tempted, just like the young woman in her dream. You know, young people are tempted because they're young. They have lots of virility and hormones and everything going on in their bodies. And this young woman had that. But when she went out in the dream, you see, God gave her a weapon. He gave her those godly principles that were built into her very being, so that she would understand that even though this was something that she was very much anticipating, maybe a little bit anxious about, but anticipating her marriage, the consummation of her marriage, she couldn't let that come ahead of her godly principles. She had to allow God to show her the right way, and he did. And then when she took that information and she went back out into the city, or into her circle of friends, and she shared that information with them. And I think probably as we look at this in the context, whether it's with Solomon and his fiancée, or whether it's in the context of Jesus and the church, or God and Israel, we need to think of it in the way that God always commands us to, he gives us an ideal. He gives us that in his word. You know, when he placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, everything was perfect, absolutely perfect. That was the ideal. Well, we know that they failed, and we know that we don't always live up to the ideal in our lives. I mean, would that we did, you know, but we don't. And so we have to understand that, you know, we can always strive toward the ideal, but when we fail and we don't meet it, then God will give us a second chance. He has that unconditional love for us. And it's the same way in our marriages. You know, if our partner doesn't always live up to every ideal that we have, then we have to accept that, and we have to forgive them for those things that we expected that we didn't get from them. But we can look for the good things. You know, I know that many times, you know, we have to love our partners when they're not very lovable, and that goes both ways. There's days when none of us are lovable, let's face it. But I've found that when that happens in my life, God is always so good to remind me of all the good things about that guy, you know. Yeah, he's got that fault. And it's probably never going to change. Not after this time. But you know what? He's got probably 10 or 20 more that are great. And just let's look at the positive here. You know, let's not dwell on that one. And God gives us that ability. You know, He does that with us too, doesn't He? God does that with us. He many times knows. God knows. He knew from the beginning Adam and Eve weren't going to live up to the ideal. He knows that no human being, especially after the sin entered into the garden, is ever going to live up to the ideal. But that doesn't keep us from striving for the ideal. We always continue to hope that we will be able to do better. And with God's help, we can. But also, we want to love our partners for who they are and not change them into somebody that they're not. You know, that's basically pretty much impossible to change another person. And that we can change ourselves. God can change us, but I can't change another person, and I shouldn't want to. You know, that's not something that any of us should do, to try to do with our partners, is change them. Let's leave that to God. If He wants them to change, He'll make sure that happens. But I think as we look back on this, as we think about God's ideal, he wants what's very best for us. He always gives, that's the ideal. But if we fail and we don't meet the ideal, then God, he will work with us, and he will help us to find what we need outside the boundaries of that. And there's going to be a day when everything's going to be ideal. We're going to be with him in eternity, and everything will be ideal then. So I hope that, from this study this morning, you've gotten the gist of it. Like I said earlier, I think God put it right in the middle of the Bible because he knew that people would need this. Satan has twisted sex into something that it shouldn't have ever been even thought about being. There's so many different ways that Satan has used this to hurt us. But God gave it to us and said it's good. It's very good for you. And this is the way I want you to procreate. I want you to be fruitful and multiply. And we need to look at it within the godly context. And that's one man and one woman for life inside the context of marriage. And so we'll go a little bit further into the book of Solomon book of Song of Songs next week. But I hope that, all of us have probably listening this morning. I hope maybe there's some young people listening. I don't know. I hope there are. But certainly if there are young people listening, this is an absolutely wonderful book for you to read before you get married and while you're courting. There's a lot of sweetness in it. There's a lot of good sense in it, but there's a lot of godly principles too. And these two young people, Solomon and his Shulamite bride, they learn a lot from each other, and they learn a lot from God. So I hope that we can learn a lot from them as we study through this week and next week too. So I hope you've enjoyed the study and gotten something from it. I know that I have. I hadn't, some of these I haven't looked at in a while, the Proverbs and the wisdom books of the Bible. And I've enjoyed studying through them and digging a little bit deeper than I normally do. A lot of times we just read over these books and just think, that they're kind of a lot of fluff and not much else, but there's a whole lot of meat in there if you get to digging. And sometimes it's the best meat that we can have. And I do believe that this is a purposeful book in the Bible that God gave us for his outlook on sexual intimacy between a man and a woman within the context of marriage. So God bless you. I hope to see a few of you later as we are gathered at church, and those of you that'll watch online. I miss seeing you at church, but I understand that everyone can't be there right now. But I love every one of you, and I hope someday soon that we can all be back together worshiping and studying together in Sunday school and in worship service, and just enjoying all the activities that we haven't been able to enjoy these past few months, because I really, really miss doing all those things. But I'm really glad we have this too, and so I'm hoping that we will continue to enjoy it together. So I love all of you. God bless.